Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tim. And thank you everyone for being here. As Tim mentioned, I'll be talking about the diving behavior of the whale shark related to geographical and environmental conditions in the Galapagos Marine Reserve in the Eastern Tropical Pacific. So just as a little introduction as to what whale sharks are, they're known as Rhincodon typus by their Latin name. They're from the order Orectolobiformes, and they are the only living member of the Rhincodontidae family. They can actually reach up to 18 meters long and weigh 20 tons, making them the largest extant fish species and the largest shark species to ever have lived. They are circumglobal and their distribution is in tropical and warm temperate waters. And we know that they can dive to at least 1,928 meters in depth. We know that they perform daily yo-yo dives, performing frequent vertical oscillations. And unfortunately, in 2016, they were downgraded in the IUCN Red List from vulnerable to endangered due to anthropogenic impacts. The whale sharks in the Galapagos provide a unique opportunity of study. Everywhere else in the world where we cite whale sharks, the whale sharks cited are actually juvenile males in coastal environments. However, the whale sharks sighted every year in the Galapagos tend to be adult female whale sharks sighted nowhere else in the world. Here we cite up to 99% female whale sharks every year. So in the past, most of the studies have been on juvenile male whale sharks, leaving a study gap on the diving behavior of adult females and whale sharks in pelagic environments. We don't really understand either why whale sharks dive and how they orient underwater. So just as a quick introduction onto magnetic fields of the Earth, the Earth has two magnetic fields, one created by the iron in the core of the Earth that creates this dipole movement of north to south magnetic fields. And then we have the one created by the magnetic anomalies of the mineral bands on the Earth's crust, which gives a different signature. In the past, we were noticing that the whale shark's horizontal movements seem to be following some ridges, fissures, fractures. They seem to be following features of the underlying bathymetry, which is what led to this study. So in this study, I decided to look at the diving behavior of adult female whale sharks in a pelagic environment with high-resolution location data. This high-resolution location data was also essential to identify the geographical and environmental conditions that influence diving. And I also decided to look at the deep diving behavior, so the dives of whale sharks that reach beyond the bathypelagic into the bathypelagic zone at greater than 1,000 meters deep. My study site, all the field work was performed in the Galapagos Islands, which are a set of islands, an archipelago, 1,000 meters off the coast of mainland. The specific area where my fieldwork was carried out was in Darwin Island, an island in the far northern region of the archipelago. And as you can see, this was the dive site where the female whale sharks were tagged. Here, our dive site drops off from 20 meters all the way down to 100 meters deep in a very rapid manner, which is why we see these very oceanic large female whale sharks. Next, my second study site was the Eastern Tropical Pacific. After the whale sharks were tagged, they transmitted their locations in this area. And this area is characterized by the strong influence from the winds created by the topography of the American continent, the influence of the intertropical convergence zone, which creates different seasons depending on the time of the year, the oceanic phenomena such as the Niño Southern Oscillation. The way that this study was carried out was through four main processes. So first, I worked on the satellite tag setup, then the actual satellite tagging of whale sharks in Darwin Island, the transmission of the data, which occurred throughout the Eastern Tropical Pacific, and then data processing, which was carried out from January to present day, mostly on RStudio and QGIS. So for this specific study, I used three different types of satellite tags. These were the Minipat and Spot, which were used in combination and were double tagged on a single whale shark. That is because the Minipat provides dive depth and information on the vertical movements of the whale sharks, however, has quite a large mean location area. Then the Spot actually provides only horizontal locations, but has high quality location resolution data, which was why they were used in combination. Whereas splash tags can actually do the same thing as both these tags used and were used independently to tag the whale sharks. The way that these satellite link tags work is when the whale shark reaches the surface, the wet-dry sensor of the tag reads that they're at the surface, sends a transmission to the satellites, which then is received by the station, processed, and sent to the researcher. So just so you can see a quick method of how the whale sharks are tagged, I have a quick clip for you. This is me tagging a 12-meter-long whale shark last August in 2020. And as you can see, I approach her without disturbing her movements, simply slide on the pressure fin clamp with a splash tag onto her dorsal fin, make sure that the tag is on correctly, and that is it. That entire process lasted less than 30 seconds and was highly uninvasive. Next, for my research, as I mentioned earlier, it was very important for me to have high quality location data. So what I did was I combined the location of the spot tags, the high quality location of the spot tags, with the light level locations of the mini-pats through a GPE3 state-space model in the Wildlife Computers data portal to improve the location accuracy of these tags. So as you can see on the left side, we have the movement of the whale shark without the spot locations, and then on the right with the spot locations, which improves the location accuracy by quite a bit. Then for the splash tags, they already come categorized by Argos location classes. And for this study, I specifically filtered the location classes 3, 2, and 1 to have a maximum error in location of about 1,500 meters. So to identify the patterns of the adult female whale sharks not studied elsewhere, I was looking into their use of the ocean zones, the ocean areas, looking at linear mixed effect models. And I also ran an analysis on the time they spent at depth using a linear regression model and the time that they spent at different temperatures. Then more specifically, using only the whale sharks tagged with splash tags for even higher location resolution data, I looked at the variables influencing their maximum dive depths. And for this, I looked at the sea surface temperatures, the chlorophyll-a concentrations, distance to coast, lunar phases, and depth of the sea floor. And the analysis was run using generalized additive models. And finally, the analysis on the deep diving, we looked into the diving into the bathymetric zone and at what time these dives were occurring, where these specific dives were occurring, and the distance that they reached to the sea floor. So for the whale sharks in this study, the results, we had 9 whale sharks which served the purpose of the study. Of these, 8 were adult females and 1 was a juvenile male, opportunistically studied. And when looking at the dive patterns, we realized that the adult females actually are very shallow divers. They spent 97% of their time diving into the epipelagic zone, so using only the first 200 meters of the water column, whereas they only did 3% of the dives into the mesopelagic zone and less than 1% into the bathypelagic zone, showing that they actually don't go very deep very often. And then when we looked at the dives into the epipelagic zone, we realized that they spent 91% of their time in waters less than 50 meters deep and over 53% of their time in waters less than 15 meters deep. Then, when looking at the ocean areas used by these specific whale sharks, we saw that most of the dives were actually performed in the ocean. However, that was to be expected considering the open ocean was the largest area in this study. So by standardizing it to the ocean area size, we actually realized that the whale sharks used the shelf break quite often. That was kind of their preferred area for diving. And then when we ran the linear mixed effect models, it was very interesting to see that the adjusting for the random variable of shark ID was highly significant, meaning that these sharks were highly driven by the environmental conditions of the moment when they were tagged. So all of them behaved differently depending on the environmental conditions at the time of tagging. When we looked at the time at temperature, we saw that majority of the time these whale sharks spent in warmer waters of 22 to 25 degrees, and also a big proportion of whale sharks spent most of their time in 25.1 to 27 degrees Celsius temperatures. Then when looking at their dive patterns and the time at depth, we saw that most of these whale sharks, as mentioned earlier, spent most of their time in the 0 to 20 meters deep and 20 to 50 meters deep. And when looking at the relationship between the dive depth and the time at depth, the deeper these whale sharks dived, the less time they spent at depth. Further, once we used the generalized additive models to look at the specific environmental and geographical variables that were influencing the diving behavior, these were the results. So what we saw in the final model selected, using a stepwise reduction and the ICAIC information criteria, was that the final model only included depth of the sea floor, the mean sea surface temperatures, and lunar phases. And from these, depth of the seafloor was considered non-significant, sea surface temperatures were considered highly significant, and lunar phases were only considered mildly significant. Furthermore, when looking at sea surface temperatures, the way to more clearly show this visually was looking at seasons. So during the cool season that runs from August to November, the whale sharks were found above the Galapagos Archipelago in this warmer area and diving way deeper. They frequently dived beyond 200 meters and all the way beyond 1,000 meters deep. Whereas during the transition into the warm season, between December to January, the whale sharks were found in a completely different area off the shelf break off the coast of Peru. So in this area, they barely performed dives deeper than 200 meters, with the deepest dive up to 300 meters. So we see a very clear spatial and temporal difference in their diving behavior during seasons. Then when looking at lunar phases, we saw that the whale sharks were diving deeper during new moon and spent more time at shallows during the full moon. Finally, when looking at the dive patterns, we saw that these occurred in very random areas, however, mostly in areas with very low surface productivity waters. And then only a single dive of these 101 would actually reach the seafloor. And that was here on the eastern coast of the Carnegie Ridge, where the whale shark reached the ocean floor at 1,400 meters deep. All the other deep dives reached a distance of 300 all the way up to 3 from the ocean floor, showing that the whale sharks didn't actually dive to reach the seafloor. When looking at the difference between the daytimes when these deep dives were occurring, we saw that most of the dives occurred at nighttime, the deep dives occurred at nighttime, with a significant difference when compared to both day and dusk. So what does this all mean? When looking at the general dive patterns of adult female whale sharks, we realized they use the water column in a very similar manner as the juvenile males do, spending a lot of time in very shallow waters. We also realized that they're highly sensitive to environmental variables. So the environmental variables both determine their movement patterns horizontally and vertically, which is why it made the second part of the study even more important. When we looked at the drivers influencing diving behavior and saw that sea surface temperatures were highly significant, what we assumed this spatial temporal differences to be for, like the reason why this is occurring, is mostly for foraging and thermoregulation purposes. So when they were found in the northern area, they were found in the Equatorial Upwelling System. And this is an area of lower surface productivity waters. So we believe that they might be diving deeper in order to feed in the mesopelagic zone, cool down their body, and actually lower down their metabolism so that their foraging is more efficient. In the opposite, when they were found in the Humboldt Current System, they are in areas of high productivity surface waters, meaning that they could easily be feeding in the surface and they do not require these deep dives. And also due to the lower temperatures of water found at the surface, they do not need to dive for thermoregulation. When looking at the lunar phase influence on the diving behavior of whale sharks, we did note that they were diving shallower at full moon. And this is the same results that have been found in different studies in the past. However, in all these studies, they were indirectly influenced by the spawning behavior of fish. So the reason why they were shallower at full moon was for foraging purposes. But this would not really apply in the open ocean. So further studies would definitely have to be conducted, especially since it was only mildly significant, to actually find a relationship between these. Next, even though bathymetry was not considered significant in the model, we still believe that the whale sharks could be using the Earth's magnetic signature to navigate. As the whale sharks move through the waters, their bodies serve as conductors, producing an electron flow along their bodies, and they can actually feel the dipole nature of the Earth's magnetic field. And they can maintain long-distance navigations this way. However, for more regional movements, they would have to dive deeper to perceive these magnetic anomalies from the Earth's crust over the Earth's main magnetic field in order to locate regionally, known as topotaxis. Unfortunately, there have been no studies performed to understand how deep these whale sharks would have to be and how far they would have to be from the Earth's crust in order to perceive this magnetic field over the main magnetic field of the Earth. Then deep dives, we assume that they could be a method of searching for prey, since they all occurred in areas of lower productivity surface waters. Finally, for whale shark conservation, the data from this study is highly important for this purpose, since fine-scale movements and drivers of movements are important to mitigate the impacts of anthropogenic activities. Also, due to global warming, we're seeing a change in distribution, so it's very important, especially if sea surface temperatures are affecting the species, to understand where new areas, new sighting locations could appear. And the data from this study is being in the creation of new marine protected areas, such as the expansion of the Galapagos Marine Reserve and the creation of the Cocos Galapagos Protected Swimway. Thank you so much to everyone that collaborated in this project, helped me specifically, and thank you all.